Today, we are sitting down with Ben Leonard, who has quite the track record. He built and scaled his own brand to 7 figures and successfully sold it. He launched Ecom Brokers to help other entrepreneurs sell their businesses. On top of that, he's written a book on brand building. He speaks at multiple conferences each year and is currently in the process of buying back the brand he sold. And as if that wasn't enough, he's doing all of this while juggling the demands of a family. In this interview, Ben's going to share some powerful insights. He'll explain why it's critical to focus on growth and creation tasks first thing in your day so you can always push your business forward. He'll also talk about the importance of delegating early, showing how getting tasks off your plate allows you to step out of the weeds and focus on scaling. Ben will dive into how hiring people you like and trust helps you build a strong team that you can rely on, giving you more freedom and mental clarity. Finally, he'll break down how to systemize your business without overcomplicating it, helping you streamline processes while avoiding the trap of perfectionism or micromanagement. If you are a brand builder who wants to scale, you are in the right place. Let's get started. So I'm super excited for this interview. Thank you for coming, Ben.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Mikhail.
So it seems to me like you've done it all. You launched a brand, you scaled it to 7 figures, you sold it, then you launched Ecom Brokers, where you help other entrepreneurs to sell their businesses. You wrote a book on how to build a brand, and you recently bought your brand back, and you speak on multiple conferences every year. And on top of that, you have a big family. So did I miss anything, or is that all?
Yeah, I do have quite a lot going on, but I'd rather be busy than bored, right? And it's important to point out that every business venture that I'm in, I partner on. I partner with other people who are better than me at the stuff I'm not good at, because if you try to have your thumbs in all the pies, you're just not going to get anywhere, right? I don't want to be pulled in too many directions. And when I partner, I share the load, and I can make sure that each business progresses that way.
Mm-hmm. Is that how you launched your first business?
No, the first business was just me. The first business was quite accidental almost. So for those of you who haven't heard me speak before, I'm from Northeast Scotland in the UK, and the city I'm from is Aberdeen, and it's an oil town. So I was working in oil and gas like everybody else. Specifically, I was the token tree hugger in the room telling oil guys they couldn't throw chemicals in the sea. It was my job to help oil companies comply with the environmental regulations. And I quite liked it. But in 2016, I got quite unwell with a heart problem. I'm fine now, but I had to take some time off work to recover. And it was while I was recovering that I started a strength and conditioning equipment brand, really as a hobby. So it was just me on my laptop in my apartment. And it turned out I was good at that. And I grew that business into a business that was generating about $6 million per year. And so then I sold it after 3 years. And so, yeah, the first time around was just me. But these days I've learned that it's important to not stretch yourself too thin and to partner with other people.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your first business. When you started the business, you were still working in your day job, or did you decide to quit and focus fully on the new brand?
I was still in my day job. And actually, I was still in my day job until just over a year before I sold the business. Because although I'm an entrepreneur, at that time I was still kind of finding my way into entrepreneurship, and I was a bit more risk averse than perhaps most entrepreneurs naturally are. And even though I probably could have quit my job a whole year before I did, I didn't. I valued the security that having that job gave me, and then I finally plucked up the courage to take that plunge. And I'm glad that I took the time to weigh that decision up, because I had a lot going on, right? Mortgage, bills, wife, baby on the way. But when I did make the move, it was the right thing.
Mm-hmm. So you were building a 7 figure business as a part-time while still having your full-time day job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Looking back, it was pretty wild. I had a lot going on a lot on my plate. I was fortunate that we didn't have kids yet. There's no way I could do that now. And also my girlfriend, who's now my wife, she was studying for a significant portion of that time, so she was super busy, always in the university library, and therefore that gave me a little bit of freedom to have fun with it, with this brand project that I was developing. And I quickly learned that in order to make this work, I was gonna need to hire, and I did, and I was gonna need to find ways to make the business slick and in some ways semi-automated.
Hmm. So, how did you manage your time when you did that? Because I know from my own experience running already a seven-figure business can be very demanding, especially if it's just you, especially if you have limited capacity. So, when did you actually go through that transition from running the business solo to realizing I need to hire if I want to keep growing?
Yeah, time management was crucial. And so to begin with, I was using every spare moment, early mornings, late nights, weekends, to work on the business. Even sneaking in work on my business, which I was super passionate about while I was at my day job, which perhaps was a little bit naughty, but hey ho, I did. Um, but then prioritizing tasks and staying organized helped me to avoid feeling overwhelmed. Um, and I also focused on one major task at a time, which kept me from getting bogged down by the sheer volume of work. So I read a great book called The One Thing by Gary Keller, which basically takes, most people listening are going to be familiar with the 80-20 principle. And there's a great book on that by Richard Koch. Um, this is the idea that 80% of your outputs are a result of 20% of your inputs. So find the most important 20% that is responsible for the 80% of outputs and work on that. Well, The One Thing by Gary Keller takes it to extreme, and it asks the question, what is the one thing that if I do this now, everything else becomes easier or irrelevant? And so I would prioritize my tasks and have my to-do list, but then I would basically look at that and be like, right, I've got a 15-minute like bit of time right now before I have to go to this stupid meeting for my day job. What's the one thing I can do right now that's actually going to move the needle on my business the most? And over time, I turned that into, I took it a step further and I created basically 4 buckets of time. And these buckets were protection, which means tasks that I have to do to protect the business, firefighting, stuff that you have no choice but to do. There was growth, which means growing stuff that is already in your business. So that might mean optimizing pay-per-click campaigns. You've already got pay-per-click campaigns and you need to make them better. And then there was creation, which means creating new stuff. So that might mean working on adding sales channels or working on product development, for instance. And finally, there was relationships. And this just means doing stuff that perhaps you promised to other people or maintaining relationships within your business network. That could be jumping on a call with somebody to help them, or it could be asking somebody a question or attending a conference, for instance. And what I would always do is start my day with growth and creation tasks for about an hour at least. And the reason for this is you know you're going to get stuck doing protection or firefighting tasks, and you could do them all day. But if you make sure you at least start with growth and creation, then you're going to be doing something, no matter what else happens that day, to move the needle forward on your business.
Mhm.
And then I would start with growth or creation, make sure I get some firefighting done, but always make sure that I'm ticking those relationship boxes, because you never know how that's going to come back around and help you in the future just by maintaining your the value that you put out there into your business network.
Mhm. So, at what point did you realize that these time management techniques are no longer going to save you going forward if you want to grow even more and you realized you actually need to bring someone on board?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't put like a specific moment where I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to hire. I was listening to all the podcasts and reading various books and realizing that I was going to need to hire. And there came a day where, something must have happened. I must have, you know, grown an extra gray hair somewhere and decided, right, today's the day I'm going to go hire somebody. And the first hire was a customer service representative. Um, and I hired this lady out of the Philippines. She was absolutely fantastic. And she handled, because, my business, the particular brand that I owned to begin with, it was a strength and conditioning brand called Beast Gear. And we encouraged a lot of feedback. At the time, the rules have changed now, but at the time I was sending out 3 emails through the Amazon email system per order. And in these emails, I was encouraging interaction with the customers. And they were giving it to me. Very often it was all great stuff, but it needed replying to. And we were doing like millions of pounds per year in sales. So I was getting a heck of a lot of messages. These needed dealing with. And every time we dealt with one of these messages, we were likely to end up with a great review off the back of it. And I simply couldn't keep up anymore. So I brought her in to do that. And then over time, her role developed, and she started to manage more day-to-day things on the Amazon side, like just checking that everything was okay with the account and the listings, checking for reviews, responding to those reviews, etc.
Mm-hmm. I personally struggled with this mindset shift that when I had to actually let go and let someone else to do the work, because as you said, customer service, it is a essential process in the business. So how did you build up the trust and actually learn to let go of that?
Yeah, it's a great point. Like initially, I was so hands-on. I felt the need to control every aspect of the business. And as the company grew, I realized that to scale effectively, I needed to let go of some of that control and to trust others. So really, at first, it was an uncomfortable feeling, but it was like forcing yourself to do it. And that shift in mindset was crucial in transitioning from just like solo entrepreneur to leader of a team. And sure, I only had a small team when I sold the business. There was me and 3 others. But the point is, it was a team, and I got to a point where I was saying, it wasn't like, I want you to do this, and I want you to do all of these steps exactly how I want to go and do it. It was, I want you to do this. Here's the outcome we need. Go figure it out. And that letting go at first is uncomfortable, but then it feels very freeing, liberating. And also, it's great for the person on the receiving end because they feel trusted and empowered, and they feel like, hey, the boss believes in me, and their belief in themselves and development grows.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned 3 team members by the time you sold the business. So it was the customer service agent, and what was the rest?
Yeah, it was. So this customer service agent who was also handling, you could call her an Amazon team member if you like. I hate the phrase VA.
Yeah.
So we won't use it. We'll say Amazon team member. She was handling customer service, day-to-day Amazon checks on listings and reviews, and then responding to those reviews. She was handling the email account because we encouraged customers to email us, through our own email address to deal with customer service issues there. We had another lady doing basically the same stuff as her, but on a different shift. And then we had a team member running social. So he was in charge of collecting all the user-generated content, rebranding that, posting it, engaging with our customers on social. And then I had other stuff outsourced too, just not in-house to team members. So for example, accounts, all outsourced to a specialist accountancy firm who understood e-commerce. Tax returns, all outsourced to that accountancy firm, and some to various firms looking after all the different European countries. Third-party logistics warehouse and fulfillment company, so a lot of stuff was delegated, just not all of it was delegated in-house. That's the joy of e-commerce. You can be extremely lean in your setup.
Mm-hmm. So where did you find these employees?
Sure. The first one, I think I found her on, I want to say Upwork or onlinejobs.ph. I've used both. One of them came first. And eventually, if I found someone Upwork, I would always find a way to move them off the platform and get rid of Upwork's cut, and I could pay them a little bit more, and also I could save a bit of money too, and bring them in full time eventually. And then later on, I have used other methods of hiring. So when I want to hire somebody full time, I use a particular recruitment firm to hire out of the Philippines. And if I want to start with somebody part time, I actually use a semi-automated system to hire people through onlinejobs.ph. So this is a system that uses a tool called make.com, which if people are unfamiliar is a bit like Zapier, but in my opinion, more powerful and better, to semi-automate the collection of, well, the creation of job posts and the collection of resumes and responses and test tasks. And I find that's a great strategy because I don't even have to, even the semi-automated bit, the semi bit, I don't even do. So for instance, relatively recently, I wanted my brand manager to hire herself an assistant. I gave her control of that process. She went off, used it to collect responses from hundreds of candidates and whittle it down in a semi-automated fashion to her favorite 3. And then she presented them to me. I joined her in interviewing them, and then we hired one. And I barely had to lift a finger. That's the joy of A, automation, and B, delegation. I let her take control of it because, hey, it was her assistant. So she felt good being able to be responsible for that.
So you mentioned a brand manager. So we fast forward to today when you actually have multiple businesses and you bought the same brand you sold years ago, you bought it back. So if you can talk a bit more about the current structure of your team for these different businesses you currently run.
Yeah, sure. So let's take an example of one of the brands that I own now. The brand manager who's in charge ultimately is a business partner of mine here in the UK, and he has assistants who report to him and look after different aspects. So that could be PPC, that could be listing optimizations, that could be the socials, that could be customer service, etc. That's not to say that you have to do it that way. You can absolutely hire someone as senior as a brand manager overseas, and it's something that I've done before. Again, it comes back to empowerment. I'm a huge fan of understanding enough that I understand the process and can give it to somebody, but I don't have to get into the weeds of it. But I'm also a fan of, if I want something done a certain way, I will simply, and this is classic, right? It's borderline cliche because everyone talks about it, but they talk about it because it works. But I'll simply record myself doing it and give it to them and say, you don't have to do it exactly how I did it, but this is how I did it, and this is the outcome I want. Go figure it out. And then this next bit I think is really important. The standard operating procedure that needs to be made, they make it. And they make it in such a way that we can very easily edit it if we need to. For instance, if there's a change in the software, or if there's a change in what is the optimal outcome that we want because algorithms have changed or whatever it might be.
When it comes to systems and processes, what I see out there is 2 extremes, right? We have people who operate in complete chaos, and then when they bring someone on board, they're all disappointed because they just don't even know what they want from the person. They can't show them what they want them to do, how to do it. But on the other side, we have the extreme of someone who wants to have an SOP for everything, right? So what are your thoughts on that? How to actually strike the perfect balance?
Yeah. I think that talking about systems and processes and outsourcing has become kind of like sexy because it almost buys into the whole 4-hour work week thing, which is a great book, but the title is very false and clickbaity. This idea that, oh, I can have all these systems and processes and everything will just happen magically for me and I'll make money. And therefore, a lot of people, they start their business wanting it to look that way when they start. And that just isn't reality. Reality is when you start, your business will be chaotic. You will be flying the plane while you build it. And that's okay. In fact, we should kind of embrace that because it's during that chaos that you start to figure out new ideas, new ways of doing things, and have brainwaves. So the way I try to teach people is embrace the chaos while you're launching and getting into orbit. And then once everything is kind of ticking over, take a step back, have a cup of tea and a deep breath, and think about, right, how do we systemize all the different things that are going on now and move from chaos to control? But it's really important to do that when you first get to orbit, not when you get to the moon, because the longer you go before you start to bring in some stability, some processes, some control, the harder it is to do later and the more chaotic it gets. And it gets like, if you imagine that the chaos when you first begin is like you're just juggling 3 balls and you can basically handle that, that's okay. That's manageable chaos. But if you go further and you're trying to juggle like 6 balls, that is not manageable chaos and it will fall apart. So you need to embrace that chaos to begin with, but then nip it in the bud and get it under control before it becomes out of control.
how do you decide which tasks to delegate and which to handle personally, right? So let's say we have a person who, as you said, got his business into the orbit, and now they're thinking, okay, now it's time to systemize the business. Now it's time to bring people on board. So how do you decide which tasks to delegate?
Yeah, good question. Couple of kind of ways of thinking about this. I think one is if it gets done frequently, like if it gets done probably monthly, and it's not high value, i.e., I should be doing other things that move the needle on the business and not this nitty gritty thing. It should be delegated, in my view. I think the other thing to do is think of like an organization that you respect. Maybe it's a competitor brand which you one day aspire to be like. And just ask yourself, is the owner of that business doing this task? And if the answer is no, then you know you shouldn't be doing it and you should get it off your desk.
Mm-hmm. And when you hire, what qualities do you look for in team members, right? Because let's say they have the qualifications, but that's not everything, right? So what qualities do you look for?
I need to like them. I need to have come off a call with them having enjoyed it, having felt like I could um, sit next to them on a long flight and not hate them. Um, I want to feel like I'm not pulling teeth in the conversation, which can be difficult culturally if you're, especially with the Philippines. So I love Filipinos. They're wonderful people. Having said that, some of them have a tendency to be quite reserved and shy, and um, perhaps, and this is just to do with their culture of respect for who the boss is, but that can be quite difficult just in terms of my personality for me to work with. Luckily, so many young Filipinos now, because of the world is smaller and the popular culture media stuff that they're consuming and the education that many of them are getting at university, is making them a bit more open and a bit more receptive to the way we are in the West. So I find it easier to build relationships with many of them. But anyway, that's a long way of saying basically I have to, yes, they have to have all the skills necessary to do the job, but I have to like them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that we're, not on the same wavelength.
So you go through multiple filters, right? They need to meet the qualifications, as you said, even though the process is automated. You define what it should look like. You filter them out based on that, but the final decision is based on whether you like them or not.
Basically, yes. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. And have hiring ever gone wrong for you? Hiring or
Yep.
delegation?
Yep. It's gone wrong. Two examples. One, I hired a guy. He wasn't in the Philippines. I'm not going to say where he's from actually because it's not relevant. There's a lot of people online in our e-commerce space will just tarnish an entire country or culture based on where one bad hire was hired, and it's ridiculous. I hired this guy, and he was skilled, but basically he was lazy. He was lazy. He didn't do the work. Um, he wanted a salary, and would often say to me, "Yeah, I've done this." I'd be like, "Okay, can you go to this?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I've done enough for the week." It's like, well, no, it's a full time role. Like, how many hours have you worked this week? And the answer would come back, and it would be significantly lower than full time. So that didn't work out. And I don't, it's difficult because it's very hard to judge that before you hire somebody. That that they're whether or not they're going to be like that. And then the other one that turned out to be a bit difficult was a lady that I hired for one of my businesses. Wasn't an e-commerce firm actually. It was our brokerage business. As an assistant, she turned out to be dishonest about the hours that she was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and at one point, I actually loaned her money. And I do believe what she told me. Basically, a close family member had died, and she was the main income generator for her family and was earning them money, and they needed money for the funeral. And I basically sent her a not insignificant amount of money for that. And when I made the decision that I had to let her go, I just that was fine. I cut my losses. I did my good deed. I helped out her family. But when I found out that she'd been dishonest, I just couldn't work with her anymore because I couldn't trust her. But I also didn't want to just cut her loose without anything. So I put her in touch with a recruitment firm that I knew to try to get her an alternative role. But there was no way that I could work with her anymore.
Mm-hmm. Since you have multiple businesses and multiple teams, how do you keep your teams aligned with your vision for that specific business?
Yeah, great question. I think it's about being honest and telling them, well, what the vision is, and especially if things change. It's also, I'm very open with my team members that, I want to have an idea meritocracy. The best idea wins. And when people know that their input is valued in that way, then they feel motivated. And it's sharing wins across the team and congratulating team members when they do well. It's having goals that we know that we're working towards, and that keeps people pulling in the right direction. Whereas if people are just kind of given, one thing I hate is this whole idea of just giving people tasks. Like, these are your tasks. I find that if you're just reducing somebody's entire role to just a list of tasks, that's extremely demotivating. But if you're giving somebody an overall picture of this is what we want to achieve and why, and this is where we're going, and these are the ways that you contribute to that, that makes it so much more motivating.
Mm-hmm. Do you put in place some long-term incentives like profit share or something like that?
I haven't done profit share in any of my brands, well, any of my businesses actually, but instead bonus related. So KPIs linked to bonuses. And something that I'm exploring going forward is also phantom equity in businesses that vests when we exit, and that the amount of phantom equity that is accrued each year is related to KPIs, depending on what that person's role is. So it's something that I'm exploring right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think
So since you have multiple businesses right now, what does your typical day look like and how you balance all of that at once?
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned before my 4 buckets. So I have and this is not how I manage my teams, I hasten to add. Like, we use task management tools like ClickUp to manage that kind of thing. But I love a good old spreadsheet. So I have a task management spreadsheet that's just for me. I have access to it, and my EA has access to it. And it has the 4 buckets that I mentioned before: protection, growth, creation, and relationships. And when I want to do a task, when something new pops up, I put it in there, and I assign it a score based on importance and urgency, so kind of like an Eisenhower matrix, but also speed, how quickly I can do it. And then I developed a formula that will then rank the importance of that task. So then I have in my day, I no longer have a to-do list. I just have, and I just see what's at the top. I don't even bother with everything else on the list. I just see, right, this is what you have to get done. And I have that for each of the businesses. It's not the case that, like, Monday is one business, Tuesday is another business, Wednesday is another business. It's a case of, right, what's the most important thing that has to get done based on the importance, the urgency, and the speed for anything, and go get it done. Now, sure, sometimes that will change. Like, a business partner will message me. It's like, shit, we have to get this thing done, like, right now because X. And it's like, okay. And I drop everything and I go and do it. But that's life.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to sellers who feel stuck or overwhelmed? Sellers who actually got to high six figures, maybe even seven figures, and they are still in the solopreneur mindset. What advice would you give them?
Um, well, uh, first of all, give yourself a break for being in the solopreneur mindset, because that's okay. Because you start in the solopreneur mindset, because when you start, you are a solopreneur. I think my advice would be to start small and focus on incremental progress. Like, break your goals into manageable tasks and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I know that's borderline cliche, but cliches exist because they are grounded in truth. Building a successful business it takes a long time, and systems aren't just going to pop up overnight. You don't have to create the perfect system, but ask yourself, okay, what was I going to do today that I really shouldn't be doing? Is the CEO of my favorite brand that I aspire to be like doing this task? Answer is probably no. Great. Let's find a way to get it off my desk. I'm going to go do it for the final time, and I'm going to record it. And then I'm going to give it to somebody. And that could be somebody that you hire online who's working on the other side of the world. It could be your next door neighbor's teenage kid who is interested in entrepreneurship and wants to earn some more money. Or it could be a family member. I don't know. There's lots of different ways to do it. But if you try to think too big, I have to systemize my entire business, you're not gonna do it. You're just not. So find the first thing that you shouldn't be doing, do it for the final time, get it off your desk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ben.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up our conversation with Ben Leonard. We covered everything from prioritizing growth and creation tasks to mastering early delegation, with great insights on how to streamline operations and build a reliable team. We also discussed the importance of systemizing your business without overcomplicating things, so you can focus on what truly matters. If you need my help and guidance to systemize your Amazon business and build the right team so you can get back your time, make sure to check out the link in the description. In the next video, I'm going to share 6 must-read books that have the potential to completely change the way you run your business. Whether you are looking to streamline your operations, sharpen your leadership skills, or get more out of your team, these books have the answers. See you next week.